You're a fool.
Welcome, everybody, to the Racing Foolz podcast, powered by Low Budget TV. I'm your co-host, Charlie Seungtai, and joining me, as usual, is Tommy Mason.
What's up?
So, Tommy, today is somewhat of a bittersweet topic on the Racing Foolz podcast. Every time we get to this point of the year, which is Halloween, most people think of candy, costumes, and parties. But the only thing I could think of when Halloween rolls around is that's the day that we lost Greg Moore. And this year marks the 20th anniversary of his passing. For the folks that have got to see Greg race in the Champ Car Series or in the Kart Series, he was he was stunning. He was one of the most exciting drivers that you will ever have watched. I mean, he had absolute supreme car control, got away with a lot of things that maybe he shouldn't have, and you know, he was slated to be joining Team Penske the next year, and they were going to have the ultimate package that was winning, which was the Reynard chassis with the Honda engines and the Firestone tires. And I mean, that car won the championship the next year with Gilles de Ferran. So I have no doubt that Greg would have won many, many titles, many, many Indy 500s, and the sky was a limit. And we lost him way too early. I know, actually, for you, Tommy, you have an interesting perspective of that weekend because you were actually there that weekend. Not necessarily on Sunday race day for the kart series, but you were there for the truck race the day before, and you were probably one of the last people that saw him on track.
So, interesting story about that day for me was the fact that my family, when I say we, my family, Jeffrey, his dad, we all went to Fontana every year and watched the NASCAR Truck Series race. We got to see and grow up with the Truck Series since its debut out west in Southern California. And that was the time of year where really nothing was happening per se, except for the dual race between trucks, NASCAR trucks, and Champ Car. So pretty big event to go to, and pretty fun because we didn't know or care about anything or anybody in open wheel racing. My family, primarily a stock car family. So it was an opportunity for us, though, to go see the trucks and see the Champ Cars on track right in front of us, see the sights, hear the cars, everything about it. And where the story gets pretty interesting is we arrived there and we're watching practice. The first thing on track was Champ Car practice, and I just noticed that these cars are flying, and I've seen them before, but it's incredible. No matter what, like, you see the car, you kind of hear them coming, and by the time you glance up to look at them to find out where they are on the back straightaway, they're practically going underneath your nose on the front straightaway. I mean, those cars, 200 and I don't know how many, 240. I remember seeing the Players special car out there, and like it was interesting seeing like all the pit boxes and the pit boards and how they would pit next to each other and practice and everything. And you know, you can't mistake the light blue Players cars. And I didn't know who was in what, other than, you know, the main drivers, Paul Tracy, obviously, and those guys that you see on SportsCenter or RPM Tonight. But I do remember seeing that light blue car always at Long Beach and always on TV, and like, oh, there it is. That's the Players car. And on Sunday when we watched the race, and then the accident happened. And that's when I had realized, wow, you know, not only is it an amazing sight to see those cars at those speeds, but that's when we all realized that those speeds are deadly.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you note the speeds, Tommy, because arguably that era of kart was the most exciting because those cars just had an unbelievable amount of horsepower. And Even though today's cars are fast, but they're not really fast through brute horsepower. They're fast through aerodynamics and tire technology and suspension. So that was sort of a golden era in kart that we didn't realize we were living in because we didn't know it was going to end. And actually, you can argue that Greg's accident kind of sped up the ending of that era. You know, when that accident happened, I actually didn't see it live, and I'm glad that I didn't see it live. I actually missed the start of the race. I missed the first 10 laps. Well, I know when I turned the TV on, they were cleaning up that accident, and I remember hearing them say that it was a serious accident, but at the time, I had zero clue of how bad it was. They didn't show any replays naturally, and I remember walking outside and telling my dad, who was working in the garage, that yeah, Greg Moore was in a serious accident, but not really having any comprehension of or idea that it was as bad as it was. So later on in the telecast, when Dr. Steve Olvey had his announcement that Greg had passed away, it was just absolutely shocking. I mean, it was one of the most unbelievable moments I'd ever had watching a race. Obviously, because I hadn't seen the accident yet, so I had I known or had I seen it, I probably would have known, kind of like Jeff Krosnoff's accident 3 years prior. But it was devastating. I mean, my dad doesn't react to a lot of things. He's a pretty calm and or sometimes just emotionless, kind of like Eli Tomac. But even he knew that this was a big deal. And I remember my brother actually calling too. He didn't have cable anymore, so I think he was watching the race on the Spanish channel. And obviously, he couldn't understand what the announcers were saying, but the Steve Olvey announcement was not in Spanish, and he understood that completely, and he was stunned. And I remember him calling me and asking me like what happened, and I'm like, dude, I don't know, I didn't see it. So it was such a devastating and sad day, and it makes you think like how did it happen, and could anything have been done differently? Obviously, ever since that accident, they've paved the infield area. There used to be grass there. That's where his car flew, over the grass and over that little embankment into the wall. And now it's all paved, so you could scrub speed if you spin out in that area. But it's just sometimes it's just bad luck, bad timing. Because actually, a few laps earlier, Richie Hearn crashed the same exact spot, same exact manner, but his results were drastically different. I mean, it was just a glance off a wall. So, sometimes if it's meant to be, it's meant to be, unfortunately. But another thing to note was he was racing that day with a broken finger that he had sustained that weekend after getting hit by a car while on his scooter. So, should he have been racing? I mean, it's easy to say now, no, or easy to, look back in hindsight, but he was a racer's racer, and he wasn't gonna give up, or if he had a chance to win a race for his team, he was gonna do it, and that was just the kind of guy Greg was. I think about Greg's accident was not the first time I'd seen someone die in a race car. And we've, unfortunately, between, all race fans, we've seen a lot of guys die, or a lot of drivers or racers die, all forms of racing. And I always try to think, why does this one hit me more than even when Dale Sr. died? Because Dale Sr. was my favorite NASCAR driver. But I think the reason why Greg's death had more of an impact on me is because a couple reasons. Number one, Greg was the first driver who I can really say I followed before he really made it. I remember watching him. I didn't have cable till 96, but my uncle and my brother would tape a lot of races for me because they had cable. And I remember seeing Greg Moore in Indy Lights just destroying everybody. I mean, Greg Moore won 10 out of 12 races in 1995. And he finished second in one of the other ones he didn't win, and his worst finish was fifth. So he won 10 out of 12 and finished first or second in 11 out of 12. I mean, he was as much of a can't-miss prospect as they came. So he was sort of the first guy that I knew was going to be good even before a lot of other people knew. I mean, if you followed racing, you already knew, but some people only follow the main series and they're like, who's this Greg Moore guy? I'm like, well, they found out very quick who Greg Moore was. So I think that's one reason why I took it a little bit harder. And the other reason is because unlike a lot of other people that we know, Dale Sr., when he died, he won everything already. He won 7 championships. He won Daytona. He won everything there was to win. Maybe trying to go over his 8th, but, he had a complete career and he's a legend. Greg was about to do all those things and he didn't get a chance to. And he became one of the biggest what ifs in racing. Probably maybe the biggest what if for people our age that, because we were in our teens when he died. I was 14 and you weren't that much younger than me. So the sky was the limit for him. And the fact that Greg Moore and Alex Zanardi never got to race the Indy 500 due to the split is probably one of the most disappointing things in racing in our lifetimes. That's like if Dale Earnhardt never got to race the Daytona 500. He was going to be so good. And the fact that Helio Castroneves, who basically took the spot that Greg would have been in, ended up winning. Well, he has 3 Indy 500 rings, but in my mind, he only really won 2, and that's another podcast for another day, Tommy. But the fact that he won Indy 500s in that car, it's like that should have been Greg, But talking about what ifs, I read an interesting article earlier this year from NASCAR Man on Twitter. I think he's the guy that also does Keep It 35. Great Twitter account to follow, guys. So if you haven't, you should probably follow NASCAR Man on Twitter. Lots of great historical stuff. But he posted an article about how before Greg signed with Penske in '99 for the 2000 season, he was actually rumored to possibly make a jump to NASCAR eventually. Teams that were talking to him included Andy Petrie in the 33 car, which ended up going to Joe Nemechek, as well as Cal Wells' new team that ended up being Scott Pruitt and Andy Houston. So Greg did run some IROC races that year. And, obviously later on, Penske added the 12 car with Ryan Newman. There's a lot of what ifs. If he had lived, if he had survived or just never crashed that day, it could have changed a lot of things in NASCAR, Tommy. Do you have any thoughts as far as what, especially knowing that Tony Stewart came along and did the crossover really successfully, what maybe could have happened with Greg Moore?
Well, that was what I was going to get at, is at that point in time, at the early 2000s and the end of the 90s, that's when we really got to see the open wheel guys coming up through the ranks. You had Kenny Irwin, Tony Stewart, even Robbie Gordon. Some of these drivers that came up through the ranks and were making their appearance into NASCAR, running pretty decently. We all know what happened with Tony Stewart. He won just about everything he could win in NASCAR and a few championships too. But Greg Moore could have easily been that guy to continue that open wheel streak. Now, we've seen that open wheel streak continue from the Tony Stewart days, from running IndyCar. Robbie, I guess, would be both, right? Yeah. So, and perfect timing for somebody like Greg Moore and the opportunity. And I think the car owners probably saw that. Wow, this is a great opportunity. We've already, at this point in time, pretty much have an open wheel guy, Tony Stewart, getting Rookie of the Year in NASCAR. So why not tap into the potential that open wheel has?
Yeah, and aside from Penske's credentials for the Indy 500, I'm pretty sure that Greg may have had an eye towards the future, and maybe that's one reason why also he maybe went with Penske, because Greg had been a Mercedes guy pretty much his whole kart career, running the Players Forsyth car, or the Players car with the Mercedes engine. And I know he ran a few races in the Mercedes CLK or CLR sports car as well, because there were some initial talks at the time that maybe that could open a door to F1 with the McLaren Mercedes team, although in hindsight, I think that those two seats were going to be booked for quite a while with Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard. So maybe that wasn't going to happen, but we could always think about what if. But maybe when he saw maybe that wasn't going to happen, like, well, maybe I'll just go with Penske, win some Indy 500s, and go to NASCAR after. But unfortunately, that wasn't meant to be. So it's very bittersweet. But all these years later, there's still fans who remember the name Greg Moore, and that's always nice. Unfortunately, a lot of the newer fans never got to see him race, but you could check it out on YouTube. I mean, Greg had a lot of fantastic duels, especially in the ovals. I mean, he won on street course too, but he was really an oval guy, which would have been great in NASCAR as well. So that's kind of it for us today. Not a long podcast today, just kind of wanted to get this one out since Halloween is right around the corner, or maybe depending on when you listen to this, just passed. But hopefully everybody has a happy Halloween, and we'll never forget Greg Moore. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time on the Racing Foolz podcast, powered by Low Budget TV. The Racing Foolz podcast is produced by TQ Media House in association with Low Budget TV. Special thanks goes out to Tommy and Jeffrey from Low Budget TV, Kelly McGuire for the free mic and mixer, and Ramon Ariola for helping create various show elements. Music is provided by RFM, royalty-free music in the YouTube audio library. If you like what you hear, give Low Budget TV a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what you think. We welcome all questions, comments, and ideas, and who knows, maybe your idea will be the next topic on the Racing Foolz podcast.